Yeah, so this is a product of the technical working group on community development that has been able to put together a concept. And I'd just like to acknowledge the contributions of several of the members from this technical working group. So I'm a voice representing quite a lot that the team has put together. And I know I have some of them on call here, so they'll be contributing to this as and where applicable. So I'm just going to take us through the initial, our start of the thinking process had 4 areas of focus that were proposed in relation to community development and what we thought we would actually do. And one of them was model villages. Then we had mental health and wellness in the community, mentorship for the young and the children, and then partnership in development of mental health and wellness infrastructure. So the consensus from the team decided to focus on mental health and wellness in the community. So the brainstorming process of mental health and wellness tried to put together so many issues that were at stake in relation to mental health and wellness, and decided to zero in on teenage pregnancy. So teenage pregnancy was one of those areas, and we focused on teenage pregnancy. And I'll just be exposing us to some of the things that we kept identifying in relation to this along the way, and also a basis on which we proposed certain interventions that we believe will be put in place, having done a lot of the background work, and with the joint effort from several of our stakeholders out there. So when we looked at the teenage pregnancy situation, when we discovered it's a global epidemic, and not only isolated in our country, Uganda. I know there's been a lot out there on the media and everywhere, but we discovered this is a global epidemic. 9 of the 10 countries globally, and 9 of the 10 countries with the highest rates are African countries. And for Uganda specifically, the highest rates, it records the highest rates in sub-Saharan Africa. That's about 28% annually. In Uganda, we also found out that more than 1 out of 4 adolescents aged 15 to 19 years become pregnant, with rates being higher, that is in the rural areas, than in the urban areas. And we also got to discover that Uganda has one of the fastest growing populations on the globe. The UBOS statistics projected that by media, that was the statistics revealed that was by media last year, should be at about 41.6 million, not quite sure where we are at now, but that was a projection for mid-year 2020. And the high maternal and child mortality rates attributed to prevalence of teenage pregnancies. We also went ahead to find out that the average global birth rate among the 15 to 19-year-olds is 49 per 1,000 girls, and country rates varying from 1 to 299 births per 1,000 girls. That's globally. And also found out that early marriage is a key factor, where we have 90% of the births to teenage mothers in developing countries occurring within marriage. That means that these girls are actually given in to marriage. And what discovered, I think that was about within this year, I think that was mid this year, where there was a report released by Girls to Brides, where Girls Not Brides, where I think a 14-year-old was married off to a 47-year-old man here in Uganda. I think that was just about mid this year. So I discovered that 90% of them occur within marriage. Approximately 12 million girls aged 15 to 19, this is globally, and at least 777,000 girls under 15 years give birth each year, that is in our developing regions. Our fertility rate for East Africa is recorded at about 7.1. And also at least 10 million unintended pregnancies occur each year among adolescent girls aged 15 to 19 years in the developing world. And of the estimated 5.6 million abortions that occur each year among adolescent girls aged 15 to 19, 3.9 million of them are unsafe. That contributes to a lot of the maternal mortality, morbidity, and the lasting health problems that accompany it. So a lot of these statistics formed a basis for us to now look at what about within Uganda, what is it like? And we discovered that within Uganda, about 360,000 teenage pregnancies occur every year, and rampant mostly in the eastern and the northern regions. We have most of the girls who are, of course, now parents or parents-to-be, those who are pregnant, are faced with a lot of disapproval from parents. They are isolated, stigmatized, and have to drop out of school. We know that most of them, even when they have had to go to school, they are told you don't have to show up because it's a bad example to those who are actually in school. Mental health effects along are dire. The whole perinatal depression, prolonged stress, anxieties, the stigma that comes along with it has a toll on the mental health of the teenagers. We have witnessed a lot of advocacy, legislation, and sensitization efforts that are going on, but we see even the rates getting much higher, and worse still with the entry of COVID-19. We know that we have seen a lot within this period, let alone the having to have the prolonged closure of schools, which schools were apparently looked at as safe spaces for these girls. Just also looking from what we have seen recently, like in about July 2020, it was reported that over 2,372 teenage girls in about 5 districts that fall within the Kasese, Kitgum, Chegegwa, Lyantonde, and Ngora were found pregnant. In Kitgum, there was a confirmation on that from the Community Development Officer's office, where they confirmed that actually over 1,519 girls below 19 years of age had visited for antenatal care. In Luka district, we can see the statistics there. Recently, the Daily Monitor revealed of the 200 teenage mothers in Kalangala, 94 of them were found HIV positive. Masaka sub-region, that's about 5 districts, registered over 1,000 teenage mothers who were found to be, who contracted HIV within the 2 lockdowns that have recently happened. And this within the Ugandan situation, of course, was very, very appalling, and we're looking at it and trying to find out. So also try to look at what the possible causes that are mentioned and that have been found to be attributed to this. And some of them are societal or cultural, like I mentioned earlier, where, I mean, a 14-year-old girl being given into marriage. There are also biological causes. We know that the onset of ovulation. Previously, we said, I mean, the average age is about 12 to 14 years old. But if you look at the situation today, even a 9-year-old might have an onset of ovulation. And then we know with the reproductive cycle, when that happens, that means the hormonal changes, and that means that actually this 9-year-old can conceive. The poverty is quite a big issue. We know that a lot of these are driven. That case that was mentioned of the 14-year-old girl, I think she was given into marriage for 150,000 Ugandan shillings and some kilograms of food, and that is what was obtained. And a lot of, in a few incidents that we could point out from what has been cited is most of the people especially in the rural areas, and because of the poverty, the whole effect of the lockdowns in the recent past has forced a lot of the parents to actually give in their teenage girls to marriage. the family issues arise. We also have COVID-19 and quite a number. I mean, we try to categorize them, but if you unpack each of these, we could talk for hours and hours about each of these causes. But categorizing them, we found out that they are attributed some of these actually result in the teenage pregnancies. On the current scene, there's, like I said, a lot of advocacy going on and quite linked to legislation. And if we look at, we all know about our sustainable development goals. We are getting very close to 2030. There's a global move to eradicate poverty by 2030 through our SDGs. But we also know that the Global Education 2030 agenda, we have goal number 4, which talks about ensuring inclusive and equitable education and promoting lifelong learning opportunities for all. And it is within these SDGs where we find that advocacy, for example, for comprehensive sexuality education is coming in. The 2012 Global Youth Forum was advocating for governments to create enabling environments. And right now, several years later, we can see that governments are embracing the whole idea of trying to close the gaps in comprehensive sexuality education, but also racing to achieve the milestones as set by the global scene. Uganda recently launched the revised guidelines for prevention and management of teenage pregnancy in schools and proposed a minimum package. And during this launch, it was also, there was a call for a multi-sectoral approach because realized a lot of gaps in cascading these guidelines. While the guidelines are set, the process of cascading is not well managed because, I mean, this is a whole big issue. So the cascading would require a multi-sectoral approach where different stakeholders come in to play their significant parts in the cascading of those guidelines for them to be able to make sense. We also have the ICPD, that was in 2019. And specifically, Uganda committed in that conference that was held in Nairobi to operationalize the National Sexuality Education Policy Framework, and specifically committed to promote universal access to all methods of family planning, provide formal national direction on sexuality education within Uganda schools, and pledge to allocate at least 10% of the maternal and child health resources to adolescent-friendly reproductive health services. Now, all these initiatives that are being set are initiatives that are on the scene, which we are looking and watching closely to see how they are actually trying to tackle this whole issue of teenage pregnancy. In February this year, we had the East African Community Legislative Assembly meet, and we know that there was a sexual reproductive health bill that was drafted in 2017. And this Legislative Assembly made a move to withdraw, a motion to withdraw and propose a redrafting, because a lot of loopholes were realized, but specifically picking out some of the loopholes. One of them that was, among others, was the grounds for access to safe abortion services. And in the proposal, it was discovered that actually abortion family planning would need to go back to the round table to require more deeper engagement in regard to how these aspects are interpreted within the context within which they are going to be operationalized. We are also watching the scene to see that, yes, there's an embracing of a multi-sectoral approach in the targeted interventions, where any targeted intervention would have to be linked to other initiatives. For example, those that are school-based, community, youth-friendly services, religious, cultural sectors would all need to be meshed if these targeted interventions have to take effect. We also, on the scene, we also realized that yes, comprehensive sexuality education is being cascaded, and the package involves prevention education, relationships, sexuality education, family life education, HIV, life skills, healthy lifestyles, and basic life safety. On the scene, we know that international standards exist where the global standards are set, and any implementation of the comprehensive sexuality education programs has to be by the international standards. Legislation, we know, is being done at regional and global levels. So while the international standards are being set, it's also expected that at regional level, getting right down to national level, proper interpretation of this is done. And by the time legislation and policies are being put in place, it is adapted to the context of the region, of the nation, respectively. Also, watching the scene, discover that a lot of interventions that are being done are based on research and studies that have been done in other regions, most especially Latin America and Europe. So a basis for decisions to be made in regard to interventions to be implemented in other areas, most of them are based in the other regions, and not so much within, for example, Sub-Saharan Africa or our regions, in the less developing countries. Okay, so what do we envisage for our proposed interventions to look like? Now, when we were trying to paint a picture for what our proposed interventions would look like, we said that our proposed intervention, one, should be able to provide a long-term solution beyond simply delaying sexual activity. Our proposed intervention should promote lifestyles that will benefit and that will result in stable adult committed relationships and families in the future. We know that the whole dysfunctionality in parenting and family life, I mean, COVID-19 alone has revealed a lot of this. But we are trying to paint a picture to see that the proposed intervention should provide a transformational approach that we will look at several years down the road and realize a different breed of parenting and family life in our communities. That is our picture that we are painting. Of course, the short-term interventions will be guided by the long-term proposed interventions. We are also saying that our proposed intervention should be values-based and should provide an environment for embracing individual values. We know that there's a lot of sexuality education that is going on out there, and information is power. Information is power, but also because of the whole loopholes in cascading, we find that most of, for example, clarification of values is done for the adolescent, for the teenager. So by the time you're given information, the values are clarified for you, and then you're asked to make a choice. Ideally, a values-based approach should support an individual to build their values base and then be able to weigh the propositions and be able to make concrete decisions. So we are envisaging that our proposed intervention would be of that kind of nature, to provide that enabling environment that will empower this adolescent to be able to form their values base, and that hopefully will be able to guide them to be able to weigh the propositions and make decisions. We are envisaging that this proposed intervention would also take into consideration the developmental ability of an adolescent, which I think is very key. And a lot of the sexuality education is tried to actually be developmentally appropriate. But when you look at the adolescent, this teenager we are looking at right now, and look at the whole realistic aspect of expecting the teenager to comprehend, think critically, do abstract reasoning, evaluate value propositions, and then be able to make a decision. So we are envisaging that this adolescent be looked at in developmentally able to do. Now we went ahead to come up with some possible interventions, devising mechanisms of sensitization, health education for the young girls to empower them. And remember, our possible interventions are backed by what we envisage to be the kind of model that we would want to use. Looking out for mechanisms to create avenues for expression, like toll-free helplines, help desks at community spaces, peer support groups, having a social support system to provide a platform for expression, but also to alleviate the stigma and build resilience. Skilling in the community setting, because one of the root causes we identified is poverty. Taking part with other stakeholders in designing CSE or comprehensive sexuality education programs that transform our communities, and participating with other stakeholders. We are looking at being able to be part of this thinking process that can contribute to designing comprehensive sexuality education programs that are transformational in nature based on our painting that I took you through earlier. Setting up model safe spaces, designing positive parenting programs, working with teacher training initiatives, and creating a breed of comprehensive sexuality education educators. So we came up with some of these, and currently we are trying to work on a framework within which all these would take shape, and that is something we are trying to build, and that's why we have convened here to think through. Also to identify stakeholders who are engaged in proposed interventions, who have engaged in proposed interventions within the area of teenage pregnancy. And we are grateful we have representatives of our stakeholders who will be speaking to us, but I'm also hopeful that we could have some of us on call who are into this and can contribute to the discussion. Looking out for gatekeepers or influencers in relevant ministries, not to be irrelevant, but to ensure that we are doing what is within the plan. Creating avenues for dialogue in regard to teenage pregnancy, so that we can engage in further in some of these discussions. Believe that the more information we get, the more discussions we engage in, the more refined it will be, and I'm sure that it would be able to, the outcomes would be great. So when we talk about what next, these are some of the next steps that we are pursuing, and don't hesitate to provide information in regard to this, or to be able to contribute to the discussion in the light of this. So yeah, that brings me to the close of what I had to share with us, and I'm looking forward to getting feedback from you, to more questions. The more questions we have to answer or to think through, the more productive or the more beneficial for us to be able to think more and be able to build this further.